Aleph, Halacha Aleph, which talks about which kelim, when you need libun, what certain discussions about which things do or don't need libun. What we're gonna talk about today is we're gonna start a discussion about dryers, in particular about spray dryers, and the discussion what we're gonna talk about is the part we're gonna talk about today, which is how we connect to this thing is how do you know whether a kli needs libun or hagol? The rule is if you use something right on fire, then you need libun. If you use something, you cook up a pot of soup that was treif, then you need hagol. What's the rules? We're going to try to clarify what those rules are, when it needs libun and when it needs hagol, and that will help us understand whether a spray dryer, and then we will eventually branch into other dryers. How do you know whether the dryer you're looking at needs libun or needs hagol? That's the first question.
If I'm not mistaken, you spoke about it here when you came.
That's very possible. That's very possible. Yeah. And what we're going to then we will, once we pass that decision, we will say, okay, now if we have a spray dryer that needs hagol, how will you do that? Okay, that's for sure not going to be today, but that will be a later part as once we're there. But really, the connection we have to Halacha Dalet is we're trying to understand when do you need libun and when do you need hagol. Once we've said that there are cases that need hagol, then we'll be able to. Then we'll say, how do you pull that off? How do you actually get it to the kasher? That's a practical question. That's sort of like an outgrowth of this discussion. Okay. Now, before I start, I have to just remind you. We're in Halacha Dalet. Halacha Aleph, we already had that for kli cheres, you need to do libun. That's a completely different thing. If you use a kli cheres for hot food, you need libun no matter what. That's not what we're talking about. Okay? We're talking about if you did, I was in the company on Wednesday, and they have huge pieces of equipment that are made out of cheres. Okay, were they to everything to kasher? We can't. Even though it's not on a fire and it's not a dry product, they need libun, but they couldn't kasher their kelim. But we're talking about something that's used right on the fire. So when does it need libun and when does it need hagol? So it turns out, okay, the way we're going to organize it, that there's going to be 4 rules, okay, as to what makes it decide if it needs libun or needs hagol. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the rules and some application and a drop of discussion. Okay. The first is, this is something we've talked about before. You only need libun if the product that you're putting on is dry. I put a piece of meat, a piece of toast, I put something dry onto a thing, then it needs libun. If you're using a liquid, no matter what, you don't need libun.
No matter how much liquid?
No matter how much. And really the point is, even though the liquid is isser, there are those, we had spoke about this a few weeks ago, that there are those who hold that if you need libun if the thing that touches the pot is the isser. Usually when you make a soup, what's touching the pot is the water, and the meat would be floating around. But they say, were the liquid itself to be the isser, then they say then you need libun also. Okay, that's not the din. If that's not the din, the shafun such a shita, but that's not the din. The din is that if you only need libun if it's a solid thing touching the kli.
And the liquid doesn't have to be water, it could be oil.
Yes, liquid could be anything. Yes, it could be oil, anything like that. Yes, correct. That's good you pointed out. But you only need libun if there's a solid. And within that, there's a discussion that's not for now.
A frying pan.
That's what I was about to say. We're not going to talk about now. That's a din much later on. Is what happens if you put something directly on the fire with a little bit of oil or a minimal amount of oil? How much oil is considered that there is liquid in the pan? Okay, we're not talking about that. Okay, that's not indicated to the shayla. Later shayla about a machmas. Okay, it's a din later on as to which things. When do you say that a frying pan? But when I say oil, I mean if you're deep frying something. Okay, if you're deep frying something, you won't need libun. Okay, the thing is sitting in a big container full of oil.
Oil is different than cooking with oil.
Right. Even if that oil would be animal fat, and even if you went to McDonald's 10 years ago when they used to use real animal fat in there, you wouldn't need libun for that fry. Okay, that's the first thing. That's all the rules. The most straightforward of all the rules. Okay, that's a tip. The second rule is like this: it has to be that the cooking is being done either on a fire or very close to a fire. If you do the cooking on another heat source, not that it's on fire, it's on a different kind of a heat source, or you're very far away from the fire. For example, I take a piece of meat and I put it onto my plate. Okay, forget about that, it's a cliche. I take a piece of meat and I put it onto my plate. That plate does not need libun. Even though it's a dry product going right into my food, it's not on the fire. You don't need libun. The way the kind of words they use is that if the fire pushes the bleed deep into the kli. Okay, so if you have a fire, you could need libun. If you're not on a fire, you're on a counter, you won't need libun. So a simple example of that is when you have an oven belt. The belt in which the food goes through the oven, that needs Libun. But as soon as the food plops off that belt and goes onto the next belt to move around the plant, that doesn't need Libun because that's not on the fire. You now, it's only the one belt that's in the fire that potentially needs Libun. Once you leave the fire and you're off to a different belt, you don't need Libun.
Good reason to recommend multiple belts.
Multiple, well,
all over the place.
Okay, well, it's
stop it soon.
That one belt that's in the fire is the one that causes the most problems. That's the one that usually needs to be replaced. Okay, now, but negate it to us, so that sounds like a simple enough thing. But this is the one that causes us the most issues. But let's first get a simple thing through. If you heat something, industrially, they don't always heat things with fire. It's common, you can heat things with steam, hot water, hot oil, or even hot air going over a steam pipe. And what they'll do is, if you cook up a kettle of ketchup, they don't have a fire burning on the bottom of that. It's a jacketed kettle. So what's heating up this kettle? What's heating this up? The fire is 500 feet away. There's steam surrounding this kettle. That kettle's not on the fire. So all they do with hot oil, or they do it with steam. There'll be steam pipes, like a radiator in a house. There'll be steam pipes running.
Hot oil
hot air.
in the jacket.
Hot oil could be in the jacket because hot oil.
Usually, is that
hotter.
what it is?
No, usually it's hot water in the jacket.
Right.
The hot oil can get hotter than hot water. So if you want to get a hotter temperature, use hot oil.
What type of oil?
Mineral oil, right? It can get much hotter than not cooking oil, like a mineral oil,
right.
and it can get much hotter. So or if you have steam coils, you just have steam pipes going back and forth, and you blow the hot air over this thing, so you can make the thing burning hot, but there's no fire there. It's just heat coming from a steam coil. Those things are not considered to be on the fire. What is on the fire is a fire. But there's another example of a fire, which is an electric coil. If you have, and this comes up in extruders, as we see it, this kind of a thing. An extruder is, if you want to make something into a shape, you want to make Cheerios or pasta or anything in a shape, you make a mass, you mush up, you make your batter, and then you push it through something that's cut to that shape. Let's say in the Cheerio, it will be cut to the shape of a hole, and then as it's coming out, it's being sliced off to be just the right size that you want. Okay, that's called an extruder. Okay, it extrudes into a shape. Some extruders have a heating element inside the extruder to help the product stay hot and flow through. If it gets too cold, it won't flow through us. So they have an electrical right there, keeping the extruder hot. Okay? Now, there may be a reason why they don't need Libun, but potentially that extruder needs Libun because it's right on the fire. Now, you wouldn't see the big burning gas flame over there, but there's an electric coil there sometimes will be an electric coil in the extruder to keep the thing hot, which will mean that potentially that thing that's being extruded needs, if you want a Kashrus, needs Libun. We'll hear a possible exception in a second, but that would be the simple understanding that needs Libun. Okay, now, the question is like this. And here is where we come to us. This is the crux of a shiloh for a spray dryer. If you have a spray dryer, I should have brought a diagram. And you have a spray dryer. Here's the dryer. This is the dryer, and the product's coming in over here. Okay, now, there's a furnace someplace which is providing the heat for this spray dryer. Okay, you can put the furnace in a bunch of different places. Sometimes they put the furnace here on the floor. Okay, and then they put a pipe up over here to blow the hot air in. Sometimes they put the furnace on a ledge that's like 2/3 of the way up. Put a furnace over here. Sometimes they put the furnace right here. The furnace is right here as the product is going in. It's a special kind of a spray dryer that the furnace is right there as the product is coming in. It's being even blown in. It gets a push from the furnace that's right there. Or there's a furnace will be over here, basically near the top, and just being blown. The heat blows in like that. Okay, well, so tell me, is this spray dryer on the fire or off the fire? The spray dryer is being heated by a fire, right? There's a furnace over here, but is this on the fire or off the fire? Now, how are you going to decide? The question is like this: should it depend on how many feet away it is? Let's say the spray dryer is 50 feet tall, and the thing's on the bottom. So is that too far? Maybe this depends on the relative to how big the thing is. Does it depend on how hot the chamber is? You could think of a dozen ways to think of it. How should we decide is this on the fire or off the fire? Okay. So first I'm going to tell you what I've heard from Rabbi Belsky, Rabbi Schefter, and Rabbi Heinlein said the same thing as well. Then we'll talk a drop of that raya to it. they have all said that their understanding is what makes something be considered on the fire or off the fire in this kind of a case is like this. See, what would happen if you turned on the burner, the fire, and you had no fan blowing air into the chamber? You just had the fire on, but no chamber there. Would this chamber get hot? Would it not get hot?
Say it again. You have what?
If the fire would be on, the furnace, one of these places where there's a fire, if it would be on, and there would be no fan blowing the air in, would the chamber get hot? Would the chamber not get hot? If it's close enough that it would heat up the chamber by itself, and the fan just speeds things up.
To what degree?
To a cooking temperature, let's say. I don't know you. But if it would heat it up, the fire's right over here. It would heat up this chamber. Of course it would heat up the chamber. Just the fan helps make it go faster. Then, that's considered to be on the fire. The fire is directly affecting the food in here. Excuse me. And this is considered on the fire and needs to be.
Has to be hot enough to be able to do its job, or
no, to just hot enough to cook. It would be a cooking temperature in here. That's considered on the fire. If the fire is away from the chamber, it's enough away from the chamber that without the fan it would never heat up the chamber, that's not considered to be on the fire. That's considered to be off the fire. And we look at it, there's just, heat is coming into this thing, but it's not the fire's heat that's coming into it.
So don't you run the risk, even if it's away from the fire, if it's heating it up a little bit, won't that create a vacuum within the chamber, and you'll draw the heat even more?
So you're saying is that if we make a little bit of heat, it would eventually build up some kind of a vacuum that would cause even more heat to come into it.
Right.
So you're saying that then it might be that if it's a little far away, it really is able to heat it up.
I'm asking
right,
if that's possible.
Of course it's possible. But let's think the other case. The spray dryer is 50 feet tall, and the fire is over here. Okay, you could stand there all day. It's not going to heat this thing up. So I'm not saying that in every case it will be obvious whether it does or doesn't, but at least we have a rule. We have a way to figure out beginnings of how to judge. Is this on the fire or is it off the fire? If it's on the fire, then it shouldn't need Libun. If it's off the fire, then it doesn't need Libun. You could Kashrus with Hakol.
And wouldn't the piping go leading from the furnace, at least for a little bit of time, a little bit of distance, be a fire?
Well, there's no food here. Right. If the fire is over here, the food is only up here. There's no food going to be down here.
Normally,
Right. In a script, here we're talking, the fire's here, there's venting here to bring all the heat all the way up to there.
Right, it's a one-way trip. Yeah.
Right. So that they have all agreed that that's what it is. And I will at the end of the shit tell you, I can give you a copy of this. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about the technicalities of it, okay? But the way you'll see here, Ravelski said the following. He said he thought he had a riot about this issue. He said he used to think that the only time it's considered on the fire is if the fire is mamish in the chamber. If the fire is out of the chamber, it's not considered, no matter what, it's not in the fire. Even half a foot away, it's not in the fire.
Not in the chamber.
If it's not in the chamber, it's considered off the fire. What?
The spray dryers are very...
Right.
They like that.
Right. Now, wait a second. Why did he say this? So, this is a Leo from Ravelski. Claire said. He said as well, me and Yossi learned from the class, there's 3 different kinds of heat, and I don't remember what they are. Okay, there's 3 different kinds of heat. There's radiant heat, and convection, and conduction, I think they're called. Okay? And there's 3 different ways that heat transfers from a heat source to a to a food. Okay? And in the class, they were explaining the miles and chesronis of the different ways of making heat. Radiant heat, that's the one that's negated to us, means that the fire, when it has direct, not contact, but direct, it faces that thing directly, this heat goes straight from the fire into the thing. Radiant heat, the example I know is, in your toaster oven, you have the red hot coils. Okay? That's conduction?
Yeah.
So what's the
Sunlight. Because the sunlight gets hot over there, but the middle could be cold. It's a ray.
It's going directly from one. Okay. Without necessarily heating.
The air can be very cold in here, but the ray comes down and heats.
Okay.
It's in a, like a electro type of.
Okay. Good. So Ravelski said, he thought that when we say that the fire makes a special belia and needs legal to get out of it, is because only if the fire is directly there does it make radiant heat that hits directly on the thing, this rays, okay, whatever it is, and therefore that's the thing that needs legal. That was he originally thought. So if the fire is out of the chamber, okay, then you don't need legal because there won't be radiant heat. The fire is blocked, there won't be radiant heat. There could be other kinds of heat. If there's something in front of the fire, you won't get your radiant heat. Now, just before we go on,
there's an opening to the chamber.
so this heat will escape around it, but the direct, what he calls the rays, going straight from one to the other, won't be there. There's something in the way. Now, of course, there's a question before we get to his riot. He decided he was wrong. The riot, according to what you're saying, that you need to have the radiant heat in many people's ovens. In a lot of cases, you won't need Libun. You wouldn't need Libun if you bake something in the oven. Because in my oven, if you bake, the fire is covered. The fire is underneath the thing. There's no radiant heat in that case. If you broil, there is. Because when you broil, the fire's on the inside. But if you just bake, you would excuse yourself from Libun in a lot of cases. If you would say such a svarv that you need radiant heat.
Wouldn't that also depend on what the surface is inside?
What do you mean?
The chamber. I mean, if it's a very shiny, like a polished stainless steel, as compared to a black finish, the polished stainless steel is going to increase, the radiant heat on it.
So you're saying that would make even more radiant heat? If that's what the svarv says.
I'm asking if that.
Okay, potentially, potentially. But this whole idea of radiant heat, he brought a riot. We'll talk about the riot for a second. For the riot, you wouldn't believe. The Slach says in Psachim that at the beginning of the part of the kids, it's talking about how you cook the korban pesach. The Gemara that talks about whether you can cook the korban, you have to roast it in the fire. What happens if you hang the animal in a chamber that used to have a fire, but no longer has a fire in it? You put a fire in, you heat it up, and then you pull the fire out, and now you just have a hot chamber. Is that considered cooked on a fire? That's the tzli'esh. Is that considered that you cooked it on a fire? Okay, that's the Gemara talks about whether that is or is not considered tzli'esh. For a korban pesach, it's not. For a korban pesach, it's not considered tzli'esh. So, the Tzlach says, he says, from the fact that you could talk about this cooking a korban pesach means other Yisurim are not a problem. He says, what about the blood that's in the animal? The blood that's in the animal, if you roast it in a fire, you're going to draw the blood out of it. And then you're going to eat the animal. But if there's no fire in the chamber, what about the blood that's absorbed into the things? How are you going to kasher it? Forget about how you're going to cook it for a korban pesach. How are you going to kasher the animal, the blood that's inside the korban pesach? So he says, so the tzach says, you see from there that you can kasher a liver, that's his case, you can kasher a liver even if there's no fire, as long as it's hot. You don't have to kasher the liver on the fire. You can kasher the liver in a hot chamber also, even if there's no physical fire. If there used to be a fire, you can kasher it also. That's what he says. That's what he wants to say. And so Rav Belsky says, I'm going to get back to the Sachas. Rav Belsky says, you see from here that things are considered on the fire, even if there's no fire in the chamber. Here you're roasting, you're broiling the liver without any fire there. So you see that something can be considered on the fire, even if there's no actual flame in the chamber. So he thought this proved what he said. He had said that it depends on that the flame is in the fire. He says in the chamber, and he says this proves that you don't have to have the flame in the chamber. Okay, now there's a few questions on what he said, which is that the Tzlach himself says, he brings this riot, but then the Tzlach says, it's against the Tosfos. It's not against us. He says, if we could give a different answer. How did they get rid of the blood? Maybe they salted the animal before they put it into there. Okay, which he says, Tosfos says, it seems that Tosfos says, you're allowed to salt the korban pesach before you put it in. Okay, so now he questions that. He wonders why the Tzlach is not convinced of what Tosfos says that you're allowed to salt it. That's what he has to do about whether you're allowed to salt the animal or not. But when he's finished, I have to tell you that the Tzlach doesn't say it the way I said it. The Tzlach says, whenever people would come to ask me the shayla, I would tell them it's usher. That they're not allowed, that's not considered to be a broiled liver. Then I started to wonder, maybe you could make up for this reason. He doesn't, and then he says, but my reason to be beko is not on Tosfos. So it's hard, and they said, well, maybe Tosfos is not right. So the Tzlach didn't say that it's mutter. The Tzlach does not say in the Tzlach that you're allowed to broil your livers in an oven chamber without fire in it. That's not what he says. He says, I told people that it was usher. And I have a reason why it might be mutter. So what I'm saying is, to bring a riot from the Tzlach, when the Tzlach himself doesn't say that it's mutter, the Tzlach says it's just a reason to possibly think it's mutter, which is not like Tosfos and not like what he used to tell people. Okay, that's mutter. And the second thing is that the Tzlach says, by korban pesach, the Mishnah says this is not kosher for korban pesach. Okay, you're not allowed to roast the korban pesach like that because it's not considered tzli'esh. The Gemara on the next plot has two terutzim as to whether that pasuk of tzli'esh that tells you that it has to be on an actual chamber, is that special for Korban Pesach, or is that a lima kol terukulo? According to the teretz of the Gemara, that it's a lima kol terukulo, so the Gemara is saying beferish that you have to have a real fire. When we say something's on the fire, it means on a real fire. So this whole slaf is built really on one teretz of the Gemara. One shot of the Gemara is that it's for Korban Pesach, one teretz for kol terukulo. Okay, so the whole slaf himself is only on one thing. But I have to tell you that even though we're questioning the raya from the tzach, that happens to be the Pri Megadim in Haggalos Kalim. That one goes to Korban Pesach. Pri Megadim in Haggalos Kalim says exactly this thing. It says that if you take a kli, you cook food in an oven that used to have a fire on it, and then you took the fire out of it, and then you cook the food into it, that kli needs libun. It's a Pri Megadim right in Haggalos Kalim of exactly this case. It comes from Mogen Avram. That it's considered ala eish, because this. We understand a sorrow for this. There was a fire here. It's not just hot. There was a fire here. Fire was taken out. It's still considered to be on the fire. So Pri Megadim says that thing is considered ala eish, and you need libun afterwards. He's talking about mamash our case. We don't have to go over to Korban Pesach.
Would it depend how hot it is in the chamber?
We'll get to it in a second. Right. We're going to get there. That's the third rule. Okay, but yes, our second rule. I'm going to ask you to hold that for a second. Okay? Right. So far we have two rules. These are the two of the simple rules, which are the only libun if there's a dry product being cooked, a piece of meat, a piece of bread, or something like that, and you only libun if the food is being cooked on a fire or close to a fire or with an electric coil. But if you have some kind of other heat source, or you're off the fire, then there's no libun. Then you never have.
Or a kid that was once on a fire.
Or a kid, that's correct. We're saying that a kid that was once on the fire. That's correct. Yes. We should get that in. That's clear that either in the fire now, close to the fire, or we used to be on the fire. That's all considered to be. That's the clear that needs to be. Yes, you're right. That's the clear that needs to be. But other kelim don't. So now we're going to get to other things in a second, but just to pause at this point, the reason to say that a spray dryer doesn't need libun, okay, is based on that second rule. In many cases, the spray dryer is not close enough to the fire, and therefore doesn't need libun. Okay, we will talk more about that in a different week as to how we apply that to a spray dryer, okay, and some of the history of how spray dryers decided and how we catch them. It's a whole history, whatever it is. Okay, but that's in theory. We're not doing it right now, but in theory, that's how you can decide whether it's not just a spray dryer, any dryer. We're going to talk about Mirz Hashem in other weeks, other dryers. If you have a fluid bed dryer, well, how do I know if it needs libun or hagala? Okay, so people will focus on making hagala. You have to first decide does it need libun or hagala. So these are the things to decide. At this place that I was at the other day that had the cheres, they also had a furnace that was obviously needed libun. Okay, it was in a big, huge furnace with a fire burning in it, like Gehenna, burning right inside it. Okay, so it's. So you have to first decide if the dryer needs or doesn't need. Okay, so we'll talk about the different kinds of dryers.
Fluid bed dryer.
Fluid bed dryer. We'll do it differently. Okay, that will be part of it as we get to other dryers. So what a fluid bed dryer is. It's a different kind of dryer that heats with hot air. But sometimes that hot air has a fire burning there, and sometimes it does. Sometimes it has steam coils. So you got to know which one it does before you decide how you're going to catch it. Okay, we'll get to those. Okay, we'll do that in a different week of all the different dryers. Okay, so we have two of the rules. Now there's the Mirz Hashem, two more rules. One is like this. One is from Rabbi Belsky. It's his own. This is his own. Absolutely. Completely his own svara, but we will hear there's a lot of basis to what he says, which is, he says that if the kli, this is what you mentioned before, if the kli never gets hotter than 200 degrees Fahrenheit, never gets hotter than 200 degrees, don't leave libun. He says, the poskim talk about the libun is because the fire has such a strength that makes the bli go in so deeply. He says, how could it be that if it's less than 200 degrees, he said, in less than 200 degrees, you could put your hand into there and it wouldn't get hot. It's not the kind of thing that's uncomfortable and you could sit there and not be affected by that thing. So how could it be that you could say the fire has this really tremendous strength and it can push a bli into something when it's mamish just warm, not to touch, to put your hand into it. If you put your hand into it, it wouldn't be terribly uncomfortable. And therefore, it's hard to believe that that's the kind of strong fire that Chazal we're talking about.
Okay, put your hand into it,
that's what he said. I don't know. Try this, all right? Try this.
You don't feel it.
So, no, not to touch it. Not to touch it on the 200 degrees. Put it in a chain on your oven, 200, and then let it sit warm up and stick your hand in. He says it's not a problem. It would not.
Try it today.
It's hard to believe he has his riot has says the bleed has to go in so strongly, it has to be, you need libun when it's such a warm thing. And there's an example of that.
200 degrees, so you got that number by...
That's for the shrimp.
But listen, around 200
It's like the
degrees.
190.
Around 200 degrees is when collagen starts to melt in a piece of meat.
Okay.
So if that has any connection to how, if something is considered fatty and it goes throughout the entire meat,
Okay.
that's how it happens.
Okay, it's fine, good. So maybe that's all right. Now,
But I understand spray dryers are always over 200.
no, we're not spray dryers now. We're just talking about the rules in general. What needs legal? No, but there is an example of this. There is a kind of a dryer. Eventually we'll get to it. There are some foods that need to be dried at a very low temperature.
Really?
The heat will ruin the product. So you want to dry it, but you don't want to use it with a lot of heat. So what you do is you dry it for a long time at a low temperature. Okay?
And it changes from liquid to powder?
No. This doesn't go. Look, this is things that are reasonably solid, and you're trying to get a little bit of moisture off. You're like trying to evaporate the
You
moisture
use
off.
spray dryers for that?
This is not a spray dryer. No, this is not for a spray dryer. No,
This is just
different kind of a dryer.
dehydrate.
Like a dehydrator. Right?
Yeah.
Now, so those, even then, it's usually hotter than 200 degrees. But there's a real example of things that would be less, which is the way you make this. You could try at home, okay? Which is the way you make meringue cookies. The way you're supposed to really make meringue cookies. Meringue cookies are made of eggs and sugar. You whip up eggs and sugar, and then you don't bake them. If you stick them into a hot oven, you'll have nothing. It'll burn. Okay, the sugar will burn. What you do is, the way you're supposed to really do it is, you're supposed to heat up your oven, turn it off, and after the oven is off, then you stick the things in. Okay? You're supposed to have just a warm chamber to heat them up. And they stay in the warm chamber for 5-10 minutes, and then they're considered ready. Okay? You're not supposed to cook it in a hot fire. You're supposed to cook it in just a warm chamber. That's what it's supposed to go into. Okay? So those kind of things, and there was a real case, but that's a kind of a thing where you might be cooking it at less than 200 degrees. Okay? It's not usual that you would cook something at less than 200 degrees. It's not. There are dryers that do it, so it's not such a common idea. Even the low temperature dryers are hotter usually than that. But in the meringue cookies, there's an example that you cook it at a very low temperature. So, and it was a real case where someone needed to kasher. And the pan, if you think about it, the pan that the cookie's sitting on, it's a dry product, sitting on right onto the pan, in the fire, so it should need libun, and they were let off the hook for this. And but there's no MacArthur, we don't have a riot system, this is almost completely a strong. And the fourth and the last rule is that this one has very firm basis in it, which is that the dry product that's on the fire the only things that need libun are the things that are in direct contact with that dry product. That means is, if I put challah into a baking pan, and I bake the challah into that baking pan, the pan needs libun to be kasher for Pesach. But the oven chamber does not need libun. The oven chamber was used to cook dry product right on the fire, but the oven chamber does not need libun gamur. The oven chamber, it does have blias, but those blias, well, maybe challah is not a good example. It does have, we'll assume it has blias, but the blias that it has do not need libun gamur. Okay, and it's almost a precarious thing. Even though Hagol counts in tough numalaf and tough days, in tough samachal, it tells you how to kasher your oven. Okay, it's there, just how to kasher your oven as a side thing, how to kasher your oven. And what you do is, it says you fill up the floor of the oven. They used to bake on the floor of the oven. You fill up the floor of the oven with coals, and that's how you kasher your oven. So I think it's smoking from says, he says, wait a second. He says, what about the roof of the oven? What about the whole rest of the oven? What happened? You only kasher the floor. You don't fill up the whole thing with coals. You just fill the floor. You cover the floor with coals. So to which he says, the rest of the oven doesn't need libun gamur. The rest of the oven just needs libun kal or hagola. Well, the heat coming off of all those coals is going to make a libun kal in the rest of the oven. The floor where you put the actual bread, that needs libun gamur. The rest of the chamber doesn't. Okay.
Even if it's the same sheet, I have a sheet, and let's say there's a rim around it, like 2 hours, 2 inches, and nothing goes on it. On a belt dryer. Okay. So you only have go on the part that it touches, not on the.
No, I'm not saying that part. You think if this would
So
be
in that oven, how do you know? Maybe the oven might be constructed out of one solid.
maybe the blaze is spread like that all the way down. Okay. That's a good question. Maybe that has to do with how far you think the blaze go. You think it's mamish just on the spot that touched the roof? Okay, that could be. I can't say that it's not true. I wasn't trying to say it. I didn't mean to say mamish only the 4 inches that have it and not the inch above. But I meant just to say not the whole chamber, or not so like in an oven. We said the oven belt needs libun gamur, but the oven chamber doesn't need libun gamur. It's only the belt itself that we have to do libun. We'll replace it. The rest of the oven just needs libun kal or hagol, which is easy, relatively easy to do. It's the belt that causes causes the problems. Okay, and of course, now I do have to tell you that there is a Prima Galu who says that. Okay? Prima Galu says that if you have a blia from a dry product rising up, it causes whatever it hits also needs to leave, but it's very much not accepted. There's such a Prima Galu that says like that, but it's not accepted. And we say that only the things that actually have contact with the Isser, with the dry Isser, they're the ones that need Hagol. Everyone else holds that the things that rise out of the food, let's say the piece of meat that's in your oven, the things that come up are liquids. That's treated as a liquid. So when the blia rises up from the piece of meat and hits the roof of your oven, it's not a dry thing. The Prima says, well, if it's a dry thing in your oven, then the blias that are hitting it are dry blias. And everybody else says is that no, the blias that are coming up are vapors, are liquids that are coming out of it, and what hits the top is considered a liquid hit the top, and therefore it needs alcohol. That's why everybody understands. Okay?
Does it matter what the surface is made from? I mean, one surface might be very porous, like if it's a brick oven. As compared
yes. So what the difference is that if the surface is so porous that it's a klicheres, then it needs hagol no matter what. Even if you cook up a pot of soup in there, it needs libun. It needs libun. If it's such a porous surface, then that's what cheres is. That it's such a porous surface that you need libun no matter what you do. You can't do hagol to it. But regular metal surfaces are considered that they can have hagol to them. Except, so we're talking about this, but if you did directly on it, that's a different. It's not because of the surface of it; it's because of the fire. It needs libun. That's a.
So if you have circulating heat, like a spray dryer would have, and it starts off liquid at the top, but by the time anything hits the bottom, because of the circulation, instead of rising, it's falling.
Yes.
It's dry at the bottom. Anything touching the walls, maybe the bottom of the spray dryer is what then requires libun because it's dry. That has been touching the.
Yes, correct.
The container.
In a spray dryer, anything that hits the wall is dry. Liquids don't hit the wall in a spray dryer. So you're cashing the walls because dry products hit them, not because liquid products hit them. So they potentially need libun. And the way out of it, the reason they don't need it would be because the fire is too far away that they're considered to be off the fire. Okay? But I think we'll stop it.
So, you had said that